So what I'd like to do real quick is talk about a classic experiment that demonstrated that there was a transforming factor between two different cell types. So in this experiment, there were pathogenic cells called S cells that were used, and then non-pathogenic cells called R cells, which stood for rough, that were also used. So pathogenic again causes illness, and then these non-pathogenic R cells did not. So in this experiment, initially what the researchers did was they performed controls. And so they took these smooth cells and they injected them into a mouse. And when they did that, the mouse died. Okay. They also took these non-pathogenic cells and injected them into a mouse. And when they did that, the mouse lived. So these initial controls were simply establishing that these are pathogenic and they cause death. These are non-pathogenic and they don't cause death. Then what they did was they took these S cells and they treated them with heat. So they killed these S cells with heat. And they injected those heat-killed S cells into the mouse. And the mouse lived. This was also a control. And this control was showing that if you kill these cells, it doesn't kill the mouse because you no longer have these pathogenic cells living. They can no longer create the toxic environment that ultimately kills the mouse. And so these three controls were necessary for the researchers to perform the final part of this experiment. And so in this final part of the experiment, they took S cells, they heated them, thereby killing them. But before they added those to the mouse, they added them to some R cells. So they mixed them with R cells in media. And then they took this mixture of those S cells that had been heat killed plus those R cells and they injected them into the mouse. And the mouse died. And when they pulled cells out of the mouse, they didn't find R cells. Instead, they found living S cells, the pathogenic ones. So, what can we deduce from this? Well, first and foremost, we know that this alone was not enough to give us these living S cells. And that's because when we just added these S cells that had been heat treated to the mouse before, we didn't see the mouse die. We know that the R cells couldn't be responsible alone for killing the mouse because we'd already injected the mouse with these R cells before and the mouse lived. So what happened here then must have been some kind of interaction between what was left of the S cells and those R cells. And so what this group inferred was that the way that you got these living these living S cells, was the R cells took up something from these dead S cells and it transformed them into S cells that then grew and killed the mouse. And so we call this particular procedure a transformation because one cell acquires genetic material from another and that causes it to change and begin behaving in a slightly or drastically different manner. And so this was the first ever transformation.